Thank you for giving the floor, Excellencies, Monsignors, sisters and brothers, ladies and gentlemen. 13 years ago, the OSCE recommended that, I quote, a public debate be opened on intolerance and discriminations against the Christian community and that their right to participate fully in public life be guaranteed, and demand an evaluation of the legislation of the participating states in the area, labor legislation, equality legislation, laws on freedom of expression and assembly, and laws relating to religious communities and the right to consensus objection. Ruth and Roger already spoke about polite persecution of Christians in the West, where faith is politely suppressed or unduly limited under democratic legal provisions, allegedly to protect the neutrality of public space and the partiality of the secular state. The Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe denounced in 2015 that in Europe, and I quote, numerous acts of hostility, violence, and vandalism have been recorded in recent years against Christians and their places of worship, but these acts are often overlooked by the national authorities. Expression of faith is sometimes unduly limited by national legislation and policies which do not allow the accommodation of religious beliefs and practices. However, this public debate is still pending. Most of Western authorities do not want to discuss about it, and mainstream Western media do not report regularly on the matter. They even try to minimize and counter any report on the topic. Here in the slide, you can see on the left, a Reuters fact check showing a map in France, labeling the map as misleading because they say that the map is not about cases of arson, about firing, but about attacks. That's the misleading. So an imprecision was just bringing for this fact checker a misleading information. And AFP, you see on the right side, an alleged arson at Toronto church, which was considered unproven. So many of the journalists, instead of researching why these attacks happen, are trying to argue against those who argue that there are already a lot of vandalism and attacks against the churches. The reality of intolerance against Christians is wide in the type of attacks and the profiles of the offenders. You see on the left side at the top, there was a Spanish cleric who was killed and murdered by jihadists in Algeciras in Spain, Diego Valencia, and the very well-known Father Hamel in France, who was beheaded as well. In the right side, we see Le Figaro. We see the cases of Islamists trying to bring some hate speech messages, I could say. You know, La France est déjà Allah, so France already belongs to Allah, or be subject to Allah. Kufars, which is, let's say, a very negative and pejorative word for those considered unbelievers. An average of 1,000 annual attacks, it was already mentioned by Marta Petrosillo, against Christian sites and Christian faithful take place only in France. And these are data from the French Home Affairs ministers. You have here some cases, for example, in the church of Saint-Omer, which was completely destroyed. You see cases of Saint Donatien in Nantes, the Nantes Cathedral, or a very big church, I think is the second church in Paris after Notre Dame, which is Saint-Sulpice, which was also subject to an arson. This is the distribution, and these are official data. This is a map produced by the French authorities. This is the distribution of anti-Christian acts. Many of them, the majority of them, are acts of vandalism in France. You see that nearly every department in France is subject to that. So it's not random, it's not just in certain cities, it's widespread. At least 312 incidents against Christian churches have taken place since May 2020 in the United States of America, including arson, beheading of statues, and anti-Christian graffiti. Other statistics raise the number to at least 137 attacks against Catholic Church in the United States, out of which at least 371 attacks have been perpetrated against Catholic churches since the U.S. Supreme Court opinion overturning Roe versus Wade on abortion was leaked in May 22, with many including graffiti with pro-abortion messages. Over 9,000 crimes were reported at UK churches in just 3 years. Just 3 years. At least 8 crimes took place at church every day from 2022 to 2024. Out of them, more than 3,000 incidents were of criminal damage, vandalism, and arson. Repairs because of vandalism and theft are already unaffordable for many churches. This is one example in Scotland of the many. This is another example in England, just in June this year. In Canada, 123 churches were burned or vandalized since the residential school announcement in May 21, following false claims of mass graves and missing children. In just over a week, 4 Catholic churches were put in fire and destroyed. You can see as well that is quite well distributed. It's not focused on a part of the country. Some examples, for example, in Alberta, in St. Jean Baptist Church, the Nativity of the Blessed Virgin Catholic Church in August 22, also imposed Anglican Church. In accordance to the research by Christopher Lamfalussy, journalist of the Belgian national newspaper La Libre Belgique, more than 200 churches are vandalized every year in Belgium. It's very surprising because Belgium seems to be a very quiet country, which is not at all. And I can tell you after 15 years living in Brussels. We had last year 85 shootings in Brussels. Maybe you don't know that. In Germany, a total of 111 attacks against churches were recorded nationwide in 2024 only, representing an increase of more than 20% compared to the previous year. A spokesperson for the Catholic Bishops' Conference declared, "For several years now, we have been dealing with an escalating dimension, excrements in holy water and confessionals, decapitated statues of Christ and saints, cigarette butts and other rubbish in front of devotional images, damaged prayer and hymn rooms, books, overturned pews, smashed windows, altar pieces, and entire altars destroyed by arson." These are only 2 examples. Nearly 300 churches in Chile have suffered arson attacks between 2013 and 2024, mostly by far-left activists. You can see, a very important national patrimony, the Church of St. Francis Church, San Francisco, and Iquique in Chile, but as well in the southern of the country, in the area of Araucanía. You see on the right side, for example, this is Santiago, the capital, and this church was completely destroyed, intentionally by, you see, for example, these 2 persons with a banner saying, "Horario de misa, domingo 12", so is the time for the Mass is at 12. Every year around the 8th of March, the International Day of the Women, hundreds of churches, and I repeat, hundreds of churches in Spain and Spanish America are graffitied and vandalized by radical feminists with hate expressions such as, "The church that illuminates the most is the one that burns," or "Take your rosaries out of my ovaries." These are, the most, I would say, acceptable messages, because I'm not sure if I should translate the one that appears here in Spanish, because it's really, really tough and very, I would say, aggressive. You see in the upper part on the left, this is in Bogota, in Colombia. But you see in the left part down in Buenos Aires, the cathedral in Buenos Aires. In upper right side, you see the co-cathedral in Spain, Logroño, and a small chapel in the university, Autonomous University in Madrid, which was also desecrated with free abortion, like education, and so on. Just to finalize, many cases of vandalism against churches, either premeditated or opportunistic, are only reflected in the statistics as property damage, disregarding that it is an attack against the Christian community, which becomes vulnerable and unsafe. I bring an example of Italy, Ireland, Finland, in Spain, of course, many cases, dozens of cases in the space of profanation, even still in the Holy Ghost, the Holy Form. We have cases of this monastery in May 24 of the Franciscan Conception in Cuenca, in the center of Spain, which were destroyed. Vandalism of Christian churches is becoming epidemic in the West, and evidences not only a worrying incivility, but a dangerous trend that erodes the right to freedom of religion of Christians. Thank you.